On social media, endless numbers of books are recommended every day. How do you know which ones are worth the hype and which ones are just disappointing? Come with me as I test 3 super popular TikTok books and tell you if you should read them or not. Can I be really mean for like 1 second? I think I get it now. This is my face constantly while reading this right now. Hello! Okay, I got Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies. This is fantasy, but it takes place in our world. It's about a woman who's like an academic. Ooh, it's starting to rain. Oh, cozy. Love that. It's about a fairy academic named Emily Wilde, and she is going to this place in Norway where she is going to kind of observe the fairies and the people in the village, the humans, and what they think of the fairies. Love that concept, but I'm a little bit wary about this being like really cozy fantasy, because in the past I've been kind of disappointed with cozy fantasy because I very quickly find it just a little bit too boring, a little bit too nothing really going on, you know? So we'll see how this goes. Guys, do you ever start reading a book and it just instantly feels like rolling yourself up in a warm blanket with how cozy it is? I'm coming at you in like my coziest. This, by the way, is one of the best purchases I've ever made. I think it's like a wearable blanket. I think they're called Snuggies. Anyway, best purchase I've ever made. Reading Emily Wilde so far feels like being in this thing. I suddenly understand what people are talking about when they're talking about cozy fantasy. I think I get it now. So I'm pleasantly surprised with like how well this is written. It's journal format, so you're reading from Emily Wilde's perspective as she's writing in her academic journal, which gives it this such a unique voice that I haven't seen in any other books yet. You know how sometimes in books you're like so dependent on the name above the chapter to know whose perspective you're reading this from? This book just so clearly doesn't need that, because the characters are so well written with such strong voices of their own that you know who's talking. Everything in this book is just giving me the perfect spring vibes. It technically shouldn't, because it takes place in this wintry landscape. There's a lot of snow, but with all the coziness, it just really helps me get in the spring mood. I recently got these like super cute strawberry lights, and oh my god, I'm feeling that the sun is returning, and so is my happiness. I just want to talk a little bit about the fact that a lot of people are calling Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia for Fairies a romantasy, and I just want to like manage your expectations that the romance is like barely a part of this book, and you definitely shouldn't read it for the romance. I mean, I really like the romance in this book between Emily Wilde and her fellow researcher that he's called like Wendell Bamblebee. Wendell Bamblebee. He's very quirky. He's giving very strong Howl vibes, like drama queen, ultimate drama queen man, and I love him for it. But the reason that I really like the budding, slowly, very cutely budding romance between those two is because the characters are just so great, not because the story focuses on the romance at all. I love characters like this that are both just so flawed but lovable. Like Wendell Bamblebee is just, he's so selfish, he is so flawed, he does horrible research. I cannot excuse that. And then our main character, Emily Wilde, she has so much dry humor. She's very awkward in social situations. The way that she is pessimistic about everything can be like genuinely a little bit annoying sometimes, but it doesn't matter because good characters have flaws. Duh. I can't believe I have to praise a book for just having well-rounded characters. Gosh, it really says something about the books I've been reading lately. Anyway, I'm having a great time. I'm having a great time. I finished Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies. Let me give you my final thoughts and ratings, and I will talk about who I would recommend this for. And we'll do that as I tie up these beautiful flowers so I can hang them up to dry, which is my new favorite thing to do when a beautiful bouquet of flowers is at its end. Oh no, oh, I'm gonna break them. Oh, I can already tell this is not gonna go well. I loved Emily Wilde. I was very pleasantly surprised. I would give it 4.5 stars, and if I continue to think about it for the next couple of weeks, it might actually be a 5-star. Now, I would really recommend this if you like stories about fae, but specifically more of the Spiderwick Chronicles, Holly Black type fae, where the fae are mean and evil. Sometimes things happen in this book where you're like, oh, okay, I thought I was reading a cozy fantasy, but this is, I guess not. And I love that. I don't want my fae to be hot and sexy. I want them to be evil and inhuman, and then I find that hot and sexy because there's something wrong with me. But yeah, the vibes of this book are like bundles and sheets of paper scattered on a desk full of information about fairy biology, you know? You would also really love this if you want a cozy fantasy. Like, it's not gonna be like, wow, in-depth world building, big action or anything like that. It's super wholesome and cozy, but it still has some stakes, you know? Things do happen. There is still danger. It kind of feels like Stardew Valley in the sense where everyone is like, oh, it's such a cozy game, it's such a cozy game, and then your heart rate suddenly is like here because you're almost dying in the mines. That's what this book has. Also, again, don't read this because you want a fantasy romance. I don't understand why people are calling this a romance. Don't read this book for the romance. Read it for the quirky, flawed, but you love them anyway characters. I think this is the perfect book to like be a little bit of a palate cleanser or get you out of a reading slump because it's only 300 pages. It's super quick and easy to get through, and it will just make you feel very good. Wow, okay, I like this. Let's do the other one, and then we'll hang them in front of the window to dry. Now for the fun part, now that I finished Emily Wilde, it is time to track it in my reading tracker. And I always get a lot of questions from you guys how I track my reading, so I thought I would show you and we can track Emily Wilde together. So I have this digital book tracker that I've been using for years that I use to track all of my reading. I made this in Notion, who I'm super excited about that they are also sponsoring this portion of the video. I decorated this page with like cute little gifts. Basically, anytime I have some kind of idea around reading, I just dump it under these lists. Here I keep track of all of the books that I really want to buy, and then once I bought it, I can just check it off like that. But now comes the most important part, how I track all of my reading in this beautiful database. Every time I come across a title that interests me, I just add it to this long TBR list. And then if I'm reading it at that moment, I can just change it to currently reading. And for example, we were currently reading Emily Wilde, but I just finished it, so I can change it over to the list of books that I have read. So now I can click on the book. There's a whole page for it. I've made all the notes on the book in here. You probably shouldn't look at that because those are spoilers. But we can add the date that we finished it. The genre, this was a fantasy book. And I would rate it 4.5 stars. And now if we go to the 2024 tab, it automatically shows up when we put in the date. You can see here that I've already read 13 books so far this year. I also have my 2023 books here. I can filter on genre if I want to. Let's do romance. As you can see, when I read romance, I tend to either really like it or not like it at all. I just love having all my reading stats like this. So I made all of this myself using Notion. Notion is an application where you can write, plan, organize, bring any idea to life. For example, when I thought a few years ago, oh, I want to digitally organize all of my reading, I made this page. When I was still a student, I organized all of my university stuff in here. And I also have pages for personal things like this recipe database. You can also use Notion AI to quickly answer questions or summarize notes. Basically, if you can think it, you can make it in Notion. And it's completely free. If you also want to start tracking your reading on Notion, but you don't really know where to start, I've actually turned this book hub into a template for you guys to use and fill in to your wishes. I just put some of my book recommendations in here, but you can just change it out for your own books. So fun! You can start using my template by clicking the link in the description and start using Notion for free. It's a beautiful day. Leora is coming by in a few minutes. I'm really excited. We're gonna go vintage shopping and book shopping, and I am on a mission to get a physical copy of Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies, at least the sequel, and hopefully also the first book. If I'm really enjoying a book on ebook, I like to get a physical copy of it as well, but my mission is kind of special because I very specifically really want the US edition because I just love the Art Nouveau style of it as compared to the UK edition. Generally speaking, in the Netherlands, I can only find the UK edition, so I hope I can find this one. We'll see if we can find Powerless. Hi.
Oh, that's so cute.
Die is ook op de Swanmarkt gekocht.
Oh, is it a ladybug?
Ladybug. Yeah.
Ladybug.
Ladybug.
Hey, Fairspace.
Ladybug and Daisy.
Oh.
I love it.
She's making me matcha.
So pretty. Yeah.
Die wil ik ook nog.
Ja, ik wil dus een andere cover.
editie.
Ja, daar ben ik dus naar op zoek. Dat is zeg maar mijn missie hier.
You look so small now. So small.
Me and my new friend.
Make your friends everywhere.
Cats specifically.
We found a little library. Does it have anything good? Yeah.
Always imagine you'd find something you really want, but you never do.
If I'm going to move, I want to bring my own books and then put like really good books in them
I have
and make
done
people
that.
very happy.
I don't know if anybody was really happy though.
I'm coming at you today with a very different vibe. It's been very rainy and windy all day suddenly. So it's just a very slow day. I just want to show you the book that I bought yesterday with Leora. It's the second Emily Wilde book. I'm very excited about this. I'm so happy that I finally read Emily Wilde. Oh, but of course first I will read something else for this video. So with Emily Wilde, it seems like There's some pretty great recommendations on TikTok. And the next book I'm going to be reading is Powerless by Lauren Roberts. I just downloaded the ebook. There is a very beautiful map in there as well, which honestly is already making me really enjoy this. I'm gonna be honest with this one, I'm very skeptical. It's being promoted as like the new Hunger Games, or the Hunger Games meets Red Queen. And Red Queen, I mean, although I really enjoyed it when I read it at 18 years old, it was super cliche and I don't think I would love it if I read it today. And comparing something to the Hunger Games, you're in dangerous territory there, especially with me, a huge Hunger Games stan. Will this book hold up to the Hunger Games? I can't imagine. But it's like fantasy Hunger Games about a main character who doesn't have any magical abilities, but she pretends like she does. And she somehow ends up in these Hunger Games-esque trials for people with magical abilities, but she doesn't have magical abilities, aka she's powerless. I think that's a super cool concept. I opened the ebook and immediately the first sentence is like, thick hot liquid runs down my arm. It's blood. Ooh, so this sounds like it's going to be super edgy. I am very curious. Like, I feel like I could hate this or love this. No in between. I'm gonna be doing my makeup as we talk about it because I need to rant. Let's start with the good things, okay? I'm breezing through it. It's kind of fun. I like stories where different people have like different abilities. Like some people can use lightning, other people can become invisible, that kind of stuff. So that's what it's got going for it. The fact that this is getting compared to the Hunger Games, insulting, sorry. So far my verdict of this book is that it's like a worse version of One Dark Window, which is a book series that I read at the beginning of this year and absolutely loved, and I can't help but compare it to each other because it's very similar in terms of tropes, right? I'm not saying anyone copied the other, they just happen to have similar tropes. Like, they're both these fantasy stories that take place in this kind of medieval-esque town, and there is a plague disease that if you catch it, you get magic, and the world really looks down on everyone that has magic. And then our main character got the plague, but then she didn't get magic. There's a love interest with dark hair and gray eyes, which honestly is like 95% of books, so we've got some enemies to lovers going on. And honestly, One Dark Window, I'm starting to realize more and more, is such a good example of, yeah, a tropey kind of cliche story, but it still works because at least the author had vision, you know? One Dark Window is a book where everything, although very simple and tropey, perfectly fits together. The author clearly had this vision of like a misty town surrounded by dark trees. Every little bit of world building neatly fits together in this clear fantasy vision that she had. When I'm reading Powerless, I genuinely feel like the author just didn't have a vision for what the world even looks like, or what the culture is, or what the vibe is. I'm genuinely wondering what the author's Pinterest board looks like. I feel like there would be nothing on it. Oh, and this lack of vision is mostly represented in the names, the fantasy names in this book. As in many books, there's different people that have different powers, and each kind of people has a different name. So for example, if you're the kind of person whose abilities that you can like run really fast, you're called a Flash in this book. But the names that are given to these people with special abilities, and I guess, I don't know, these are like mild spoilers for the world building. The names that are given, the people who can move things with their mind, aka they have telekinesis, are called teles. So they're like, wow, there's this imperial princess, she's a tele. I don't know, if I reading a fantasy book, I don't want to be reminded of my telephone. And then the people whose magical ability is that they are really strong, like for example the king, the intimidating king. Oh, there is the renowned king, the famous and very powerful Brawny. I genuinely burst out laughing when I read that for the first time. You can't make a king intimidating if it sounds like he's really into My Little Pony. Like, call your telekinesis people mind benders or something, and call your super strong people strong fists. I don't know, I know that's still cliche, but it's better than Brawny. Brawny? I'm sorry, I'm losing my mind over like little things, I know. It just, no, I can't. Can I be really mean for like 1 second? It just sounds like a child made that up. I'm so sorry. I don't feel like I'm transported into this magical world that is the result of the author's imagination. By the way, this is actually funny. This might be intentionally funny, but we have our love interest who's like one of the princes, Kai, and his thing is that he's just never wearing a shirt. Within just the first 25% of the book, there's so many scenes where the punchline is, oh, Prince Kai, you're not wearing a shirt again. He just really likes taking off his shirt. I don't know. He's getting the Jacob Black treatment. And if all that wasn't enough, this book also has a very strong case of the characters having conversations that are extremely unnatural just to convey information to the reader, which is just one of my biggest pet peeves. When two characters who like really know each other are like, as you know, I am the general's daughter, and because of that, blah blah blah. Well, I guess we wouldn't do that since we're half brothers, you know. I really don't like looking at myself in a mirror like this. This is bad. I'm never gonna do my makeup again looking in this kind of mirror. Oh. Also, I'm getting the very strong feeling that I'm reading a romantasy, which isn't a bad thing. I enjoy romantasy, but just based on the description around this book, I really didn't expect all the focus to be on the romance. But so far, we are getting a lot of like forced witty dialogue and very forced enemies to lovers, where they're constantly like putting knives against each other's throats, and I'm just like, why are you doing this? This just doesn't really make any sense. The whole thing just feels forced. I'm unhappy. But it is an entertaining story, so I am gonna continue it. Maybe I just need to get into it. Because I heard so many great things about this. I'm not hopeful. The best decision that I've made so far this year for spring is going to the market every week and buying fresh flowers. It makes such a difference for the room. Okay, anyway, I am going to my parents because I haven't seen them in a while. And I very much miss Momo, my cat. So I'm just gonna pack my stuff and I will give you more update on me reading Powerless. I don't want to be negative. Here's the weird thing. You guys know that I always said I love it when two characters that we ship together just flirt a lot, and I feel like a lot of stories just don't have enough flirting between characters. And yet here in this book, the two love interests, Payden and Prince Kai. Why are all princes always called Kai? They are flirting with each other constantly, and I'm not liking it. So why is that? There's one thing that I've been seeing in books, movies, any kind of media the past years, and it's really grinding my gears, and that is this concept of stories having all payoff but no build up to earn the payoff. Like, it's very clear, like, this author had a vision of like, oh, they're gonna be so flirty with each other, and like, we're gonna have this who did this to you scene, and she just writes it in, but there's no build up towards these moments, so they just lose their impact. And it's the same with all the flirting. Like, every single scene between these two characters is them just immediately being here in terms of flirting. Nothing else happens when these two are together. Like, it's just for the romance. barely anything else of importance happens. Whereas in a story with a good flirty romance, there's like a slow build-up. Like there needs to be scenes between the two characters where they're not being romantic, like you're just getting to know them, or there's, you know, plot happening. At some point there's like that first scene where one of the two says something that like shows that they're either a little bit flirty or actually like into the other person. It's like, what's going on, you know, like, oh, they just said something flirty, and then it just builds from there. That's how you do that. But this, I don't like it. Oh, little spider. Hello. Oh, I just saw you drop down. That was very elegant of you. So the characters are just like here flirting from page 1. He's constantly calling her darling as like an annoying little nickname. For me, this really feels like there's just no build up towards everything, and therefore everything falls flat. And I'm not feeling the payoff of any of the cool scenes at all. But a lot of people love this book. So if you love this book, I'm genuinely curious, like let me know, like how did you experience that? Anyway, I'm gonna go and cuddle my cat and finish this book, and I'll tell you what I think when I finish it. Now, however negative I am being, I am breezing through this book. It is super quick to get through, and it is enjoyable in all its action scenes. I'm now 300 pages in, which means I am past halfway into this book, and now, finally, it's actually starting to get kind of interesting. We have a little bit more intrigue, a little bit more secrets, so maybe this book can still be saved. It did not save itself. But instead of ranting on and on about why I'm definitely going to be giving this book 1 star, instead, we can do this. Maybe you are very drawn to the concept of Powerless and you really want something similar. I'm just going to recommend to you why you should read either Serpent and the Wings of Night or One Dark Window, because they're very similar to Powerless, but just better. Because they do very similar things that Powerless tries to do, but actually does it well. I didn't have access to a printer, so you're gonna have to do with these very beautiful whiteboard pen rendition of the covers. If you liked Powerless's concept of a plague that gives people magical abilities except for the main character, you should read One Dark Window, where the exact same thing happens, except there is a way more atmosphere in the world around this plague. The atmosphere in One Dark Window is very dark, moody, hazy. The author actually creates a world. And if you like Powerless's concept of a magic system where different people have these different skills, again, same thing happens in One Dark Window, except it's an actually well thought out magic system around playing cards, and every card gives you a different ability. And this magic system is actually connected to the history and the lore of the world, you know, world building. The only detail about the culture and the world that we are given in Powerless is that there is a constant reference to people eating sticky buns. Every time they're talking about food, it's about sticky buns. It is the only detail that exists about this world. If I didn't know better, I would think this is just an entire kingdom filled with sticky buns. But maybe you were drawn to the concept of Powerless because you really just want an easy to read romantasy. Well, then read The Serpent and the Wings of Night, the only TikTok romantasy book that I've actually enjoyed, that also has an actual lore and world building around vampires in this case, so that there's sufficient, you know, foundation of story to carry the romance. Maybe you were attracted to Powerless because of just, you know, the tropes in there that you really love. It has very strong enemies to lovers, a grumpy female main character, and a very flirty love interest that calls the main character a little nickname. same exact things happen in Serpent and the Wings of Night. Except in this book, although yeah, most of the story is romance because it's romantasy, there's actual build-up towards it. We actually first get to know the characters, whereas in Powerless, I really felt like these characters were just wet cardboard, so I didn't care about the romance at all. Powerless, it's very, very clear that these characters and the romance exist just to fill an enemies to lovers, knives to throats, who did this to you trope checkbox. And even though a lot of those tropes also appear in Serpent and the Wings of Night, it feels like they're part of an original story. But maybe you don't actually want that much romance, like you want it to be fantasy first, but with a good romance simmering in the background, then One Dark Window is great. And the sequel is going to be even better for you. Maybe you like the fact that Powerless had trials in its plots. Again, Serpent and the Wings of Night is right there. There's also a whole trial plotline. What I'll give Powerless is that it is like a fun, action-packed story, but I think Serpent and the Wings of Night does that as well, except on top of that you get a little bit more detail around everything in the plot. And last but not least, maybe you were attracted to Powerless because you were promised like an interesting political fantasy, in which case I don't think any of these are gonna be what you want. If you want to read this because it's compared to the Hunger Games, just read the Hunger Games. Okay, next up I'm going to be reading Bride by Ellie Hazelwood, and I just cannot imagine that that is going to be any better of an experience. Ellie Hazelwood is a mixed bag for me. I like some of her stuff, but then I also cringe a lot at the way that she writes, and something is telling me that this werewolf bride fantasy, it's not really gonna lean away from the cringe. To be honest, I don't know anything about what this book is about, other than that it's about a werewolf and a main character who has to marry the werewolf. And I know that there's going to be like fanfiction werewolf smut nutting things happening in here. I've only finished the prologue and I already need to debrief with you guys. It's oh my god, I won't spoil anything for like further into the book, but I just have to talk about this is just the prologue, guys. First of all, our main character is called Misery. I think it's a fitting vampire name. So the point of this book, the concept, is that vampires and werewolves have been in this century-long war, and our main character, Misery, a vampire, ends up in this marriage of convenience with a werewolf, and the prologue starts with their marriage, and she hasn't even met this werewolf yet until she will meet him at the altar. And this book is so deliciously unserious. Misery's like, can I please meet my future husband before I see him at the altar? And people just tell her like, he's the alpha, Miss Lark. He's too busy to meet. Busy with his pack, Miss Lark. I pictured him in a home gym, tirelessly working on his abs, and shrugged. And they're constantly like, oh my god, he's a werewolf, he's gonna kill you, and they're so like edgy about it. When do you think your future husband will try to kill you? Tomorrow? Next week? Who's to say? Within a month for sure. For sure. The main character is just so unbothered. It's actually really funny. A lot of the things that happen in this book so far, even in like the first 20 pages, I would have cringed at in any other book, but this is so over the top and it feels so self-aware. It just like veers into satirical and funny. Like, of course, when she meets this werewolf at the altar, she stumbles and falls, and then he falls on top of her and is like pinning her down to the ground, and she's like, oh, it's like I'm his prey. He tries to sniff her, and then the prologue ends with this sentence. You, he says, voice deep, almost too low to hear. How the f*** do you smell like this? Less than 10 minutes later, he slips a ring around my finger and we swear to love each other till the day we die. I think this is gonna be very funny. So my experience has been surprisingly positive. This is definitely Ellie Hazelwood at her funniest. The story is just so unserious and self-aware that you just can't cringe at it. And the thing is, this book has your typical alpha man with no personality despite being dominant, and there's also a rather annoying miscommunication plotline going. Basically, everything about this book I should be hating, but I don't. And instead, I am somehow giggling and kicking my feet at objectively odd vampire and werewolf mating rituals. Yeah, reading this book on the train was kind of an embarrassing experience. I don't know what Ellie Hazel would put in this book, but I'm having a surprisingly good time. The only thing that I am so scared of is the knotting. If you don't know what that is, I'm not gonna explain it to you, but it has to do with wolf mating. Yeah, and I heard that it will unironically happen in this book, and I'm very much not prepared to be reading that on the train, so I hope I will come across that scene once I am safe at home. Not has been mentioned. I am not a fan. This is my face constantly while reading this right now. No. I mean, I'm not judging anyone who does enjoy this. I mean, I just read all the previous weird vampire and werewolf scenes that came before this with a straight face, somehow. But I think I've encountered my limits, so to say. I don't like this book anymore. Well, okay. You know what? I thought I would hate this book, and I actually overall genuinely enjoyed it. I would give it 3 out of 5 stars. I think if you're the kind of person that loves to kind of hate on like bad and cringy romance books, I think maybe if you really like those videos that I make where I talk about like the cringy romance books that I've read, I think you might really enjoy this because it's written to be laughed at. Like, that's kind of the point. It's a little bit satirical, but then also somehow you will get invested. I personally just wasn't a big fan of like the werewolf spice stuff. Like, it just didn't work for me. I never thought I would say this, but I do genuinely understand why people would like it. So that is a compliment. Okay, very differing opinions in this video. I read a 1-star book, a 3-star book, and a 5-star book. I guess this just goes to show that there are good recommendations on TikTok and there's also really bad ones. Well, I hope you enjoyed this little reading vlog. It was fun to share the experience with you guys. I want to end by thanking all of my patrons with a special shout out to all of my elite Patreon members. I have a book club on Patreon, so if you want to join that, link will be in the description. I hope you really enjoyed this video. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and I will see you soon with another video very soon. Goodbye!